Okay, so we are here for our final panel with a keynote of 3 secretaries from the current administration. So I'll go ahead and introduce each one of them and then turn it over to our moderator, Dean Bayruti. So with us today is Serena Mcllwain, who is Secretary of Maryland Department of the Environment and works of its Air, Radiation, Land and Materials, Water and Science and Operational Services Administration, along with the Office of Budget and Infrastructure and Financing and Office of Emergency Preparedness and Response, among other units. She's a member of the Governor's Council on the Chesapeake Bay and the Governor's Subcabinet on Commerce, International Affairs, Infrastructure, Smart Growth. She chairs the Maryland Commission on Climate Change. Then with that, we have Kevin Atticks. Kevin is the Secretary of Maryland Department of Agriculture. Prior to Kevin's appointment as Secretary, he was CEO and founder of Grow and Fortify, a nonprofit that supports value-added agricultural organizations and in businesses they represent. Grow and Fortify published the first assessment of the state's value-added agricultural industry, illustrating the expansive impact generated by this sector, which includes wineries, creameries, meat processing, agritourism, equine, and dozens of other industry segments. They all have very long bios, and we have a short period of time, so I'm just abbreviating everybody's bios at this point. And then our final secretary up is Josh Kurtz, Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources. He is a lifelong outdoor enthusiast and conservationist, passionate about the beauty of our state and all the resources it has to offer. Under the Moore-Miller administration, Secretary Kurtz leads teams across the state working to improve water quality and bay resilience, restoring and conserving forested lands, expanding access to our state parks, monitor and slow the spread of invasive species, and ensure that the state maintains suitable fisheries. And finally, moderating the panel, we have Dean Craig Bayruti, who asked me not to read his bio, so I will just turn it over to him.
Appreciate that, Paul, and it's great to see everybody here. This is wonderful. Look, this is the last session of the day, and look how many people are here. So obviously, they're not here for me, they're here to listen to all of you, and that's just wonderful. My name is Craig Bayruti. I serve as the Dean of the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources. It's a real pleasure to be here, and it really is. This is a testament, I think, to the opportunity that people have to actually hear from each and every one of you. Now, I was given a whole series of questions, and I asked Joshua if, in fact, he's prepared for these questions. He said, I didn't want to even see these questions ahead of time, so go ahead and send them to him, and it's going to be really interesting. Oh, did you really? All right. So this is to all the secretaries, and I'm going to let you all decide who's going to go first. You all have microphones, and you can fight over that yourself. So the first question is, each of you has different roles in regulating and working with the agricultural, aquaculture, and resource-based industries in the state. What are some of Governor Moore's and your goals related to these various industries?
Okay, I'll start. I'm Serena Mcllwain, Secretary, just in case you didn't figure out which one of us was Serena. It's me. So the governor's goals, which are aligned with my goals, which one is protecting the Chesapeake Bay and restoring the Chesapeake Bay. That is just so important. I'm happy to say that the governor is now the chair of the Chesapeake Bay, Council program. And so that alone shows how important restoring the Chesapeake Bay is. And so it aligns directly with my goal to fight climate change. And so we are very much aligned in order to really ensure that the Chesapeake Bay is restored and monitored. Climate change is a big part of that. So those are my goals. Those are the governor's goals. I think that are most appropriate for this audience anyway. We have other goals too, but those are the most important.
We'll save agriculture for last. All right, so thank you all very much. Josh Kurtz, Department of Natural Resources. And I think when we think about the governor's goals, as evident by the announcement earlier today, sustainability, and we have a new chief sustainability officer we're looking forward to working with, but sustainability is at the core of that. And when we think about our natural resource economies, I think the most important thing we can do is work to increase abundance. whether that's in the fishery space, whether that's in the timber space, and at the same time really figure out and build into our model how we think about indirect economic activity. You know, we're seeing a new economy, right? We're seeing a new way of working, and people loving where they live is critical to that. So we're thinking about that when we think about how we're providing access to our state lands and our natural resources, to our recreational activities. And one of the governor's goals is making Maryland the greenest state in the country. And really that means sustainability. That means finding balance and ensuring that our natural resources provide the ecological, the social, the economic benefits to all Marylanders. And that's really how we're thinking about it at the department.
That means I'm Kevin Atticks. Third one in, batting cleanup, but they said it all. The only thing I would add is that when I look at agriculture and I look at the governor's priorities, food resiliency, food system resiliency, feeding people, in improving the livelihood of Marylanders, improving the economic base in Maryland. Agriculture starts as the #1 industry, the #1 commercial industry in the state. But if we doubled it, we've just doubled our base. We've doubled our GDP. We're growing more food. And I think one of the governor's top goals is about fixing poverty. I mean, they're big goals. Fixing poverty, eliminating poverty. Part of doing that is making sure that there's good, healthy, local food available. And if any of you, like I did, lived through the lean times of COVID, where for a couple of weeks you couldn't find certain things, you couldn't find your normal food in the grocery store, but where you could find it was on a local farm that was able to process their own meat or process their own milk. And so if we can build that system and build the kind of food system resiliency in the state, we're going to be in a much better place for poverty, for economics, quality of life, et cetera.
Great, thank you. By the way, this is a giant teleprompter. They're reading their answers. I'm kidding. That's right. And while they're talking, think about questions that you might have as well. So, I mean, if there's any questions at all in between when I ask them questions, raise your hand, prompt them a little bit. I know that they can actually, they'd be willing to answer those questions. So each of you came into the office with diverse backgrounds. What have you learned less than a year into the job, and how have your backgrounds helped? Kevin, why don't we start with you and then go the opposite direction?
So I came from the land of running nonprofit trade associations and then running a small business that supported those organizations. And for better or worse, I spent 20 years on the outside of state agencies, looking in, trying to figure out why they're not moving faster on these great ideas that industry has or that nonprofits have, why they're not embracing these new technologies and these new visions and new directions. And so now that I have the unique perspective of seeing that work from the inside, it's clear to me, right? Government has grown to a point where, I'll use the B word, there's a lot of bureaucracy. And one of the things that I've been clear with our team at the agency is we're going to get back to people in a timely manner. We're going to listen to all ideas, and if a group or an individual or a nonprofit has a great new idea forward, and there are a number of you in the room who I've spent a lot of time speaking with to inform what we're going to do, that you know, no discussion, no idea is a bad idea. We have to hear it. We have to, when there are good ones, internalize them. And you'll hear that the governor has wanted to make sure that our agencies are running as cleanly and efficiently as possible, and that we're nimble. And nimble in government, you know, they're not friends. And so it's our goal to bridge that divide and make sure it happens.
All right, I'll go now. So I came recently from California's Environmental Protection Agency. There, I was the undersecretary. So what I learned coming here, I thought I was stepping into, it's essentially the same role, but the Chesapeake Bay and the responsibility of meeting the total maximum daily load, the TMDL, is something new for me. So I learned that right away, how important that is to Maryland. In California, we have the San Francisco Bay and other bays and watersheds, but we weren't directly responsible for coordinating the TMDL there. So that's what I learned walking in, just how, first, how important the Chesapeake Bay is to Marylanders. And I was just thrilled to know that I am actually responsible for making sure the TMDL is met. So US EPA looks at me and says, hey, what are you doing? How are you making sure that the TMDL is met? And so that was new for me. And so out of all the priorities that I walked into thinking I would highlight, again, I realized, wow, coming back home to Maryland, that's where the love is. So I'm just happy that that is a part of my job, a main part of my job.
I think they both said it really well. You know, we've got some really big and ambitious programs. And I think, you know, Kevin talked about bureaucracy, and the other side of bureaucracy is people. And one thing that, you know, the governor has as a priority and is important for us is really building out our teams. We came in with high vacancy rates. And one thing that I've learned over the course of my career, no matter where it was, as a field researcher, in the nonprofit space, in academia, it's having a quality team is going to lead you to good results. And I think, you know, sitting with these two and many of our other colleagues, I think we have good teams there, and I see all of us building out our agencies with really strong teams. So I think getting back to people, and Kevin, to your point, and in order to get back to people, we have to have people to get back to people. So I think that has been something that I've taken from other roles and really followed the lead of the governor on. I think that's critically important.
I'll just add one thing. I also learned just our roles and how we have to work together in a very collaborative way and be partners. That was a little different as well coming here. Sometimes it's a struggle to work with your colleagues, heads of different agencies. So the governor has made it very clear that we will govern together. And that's why we're here together. But yes, that was new to me, welcomed, and I'm just so happy to know that I have my colleagues who are with me today so that we can do the good work for Maryland as one.
Great, thank you. Any questions? Moving on. How do you plan to work together to address some of our key issues that work at the nexus of your three agencies? Let me give you some examples. Climate change and coastal resiliency, both terrestrial and aquatic invasive species, and declining fisheries concerns. Joshua, why don't you start?
All right. I think there's a lot of things, and the great thing about the state that we're in, and also some of the governor's first executive orders, was the formalization of some of this work, whether that be the watershed, the Bay Watershed Council, which all of us are on, really formalizing how we work together, being clear about what each one of our agencies does and is responsible for, I think is important. But I think just as important as that is the informal pieces. You know, we all text each other regularly, we're staying on top of that, and we're building those relationships, not only with ourselves, but across agency at the staff level. I think that's going to allow us to be very successful.
I agree with that. And I'll say, again, back to the Chesapeake Bay and the watersheds, we all have a role. I have a role, a regulatory role, as well as, again, the TMDL. You have a piece of that, your agency, you have a piece of that. And so together, we're responsible, the three of us, making sure that the Chesapeake Bay is restored. And so we plan to work together because, again, even though I'm regulating a certain pieces of it, I can't do my job without the support of agriculture and natural resources. So that's the partnership that I spoke about.
Two quick examples. So we have a challenge in the Chesapeake Bay with blue catfish. How many of you regularly eat blue catfish? What the heck? Shelby in the back? Okay. You all are required to eat about 100 pounds of blue catfish by the end of the year. Maryland wild-caught blue catfish. That math doesn't add up. Sorry, 1 million pounds by the end of the year. So we've got this incredible problem where we have this introduced non-native species. It loves it here. It grows fast. It eats everything. But why is that a problem? Well, we go out there, sport fish, have a great time, as we recently did. The problem is they're eating oysters. They're eating crabs, they're eating rockfish, which makes them tastier. But the problem with that is we're spending a lot of money putting oysters in the bay to help save the bay, and yet we're feeding an invasive species. So that's a place where Secretary Kurtz's department regulates fisheries and essentially the catfish, and our agency helps promote the eating of seafood. And so we're working collaboratively on that. Another example is soil health. We talked about TMDL, but when you think about farming, which farmers always say this, we're the original environmentalists and conservationists, because if they don't have good soil, they can't grow crops. The better the soil, the higher the yield, the more money they make. So a lot of our programs and incentives that are designed to help mitigate runoff and help keep farm stuff on farms and not in the bay, that's good for soil health. And as soil health gets better, not only is it sequestering more carbon, we love that, that helps with your goals, but it also can absorb more rainwater. And so at a recent Bay Commission meeting, we heard a farmer state that over his 30 years, he has gone from being able to have his soil accommodate a ½ inch of rain within an hour to now his soil can accommodate 3 or 4 inches of rain within an hour, meaning it can absorb it and it doesn't run off. So the things that we're doing to help save the bay are also sequestering carbon. The things that we're doing to help promote Maryland watermen and seafood is helping to clean the bay.
And I'll just add that we're friends to farmers, even though we're the environmental, I'll say protection agency, that's what we do. But like you said, with soil health and all the things that farmers need to do to survive and make a profit. At the same time, we're looking at the climate issues, we're looking at the nutrients that are running off, because again, we're protecting the watersheds. But we work in partnership, because it's not us versus the farmers, it's us together. So I'd like to always make that a point that yes, we care about all the things that are coming off of the land from the farmers, but we are also here for the farmers and working with the farmers.
Great, thank you. Kevin, did I hear you right that there is actually a market for blue catfish jerky?
There is a market for blue catfish jerky, blue catfish nuggets,
Gumbo,
all kinds of great stuff. You should see the mildly awkward video that I shot with the governor cooking blue catfish tacos, and like fantastic, single best tacos I've ever had. I was not very good. I haven't been invited back as a chef, but like so delicious. And it's about, these problems. We could talk about deer, we could talk about solar. They're complicated issues, but we have the answers for it. If we just created a couple of markets around the country, if MDA created a couple of markets around the country for wild-caught blue, Chesapeake Bay blue catfish, we could solve the problem.
Thank you. Hold on for a minute. Paul, what? Oh, Paul.
Well, I'll go first. The idea of a carbon market is incredibly attractive to the industry. The challenge with it is that you need someone to host, monetize, create that market. So markets like that exist when regulation is put on businesses saying, you can't pollute, and if you do, you have to buy credits, and here are the available credits. So it's a little bigger than I think what one agency could do, but it's an extremely attractive model.
Yeah, and I'd pick up on that too. I think we recently had the Conservation Finance Act passed in the state of Maryland. All three of our agencies are working on implementation right now. And what we're realizing is that, and I think all of us, is procurement is really difficult, right? We're really good at buying cars. We're really good at buying boats. We are not good at buying outcomes. And so what we're working on internally is that paradigm shift to buying outcomes. We have a few different things going on. Buying outcomes outside the watershed. You look at what MDE is doing with the Conowingo WIP. We've got a bill coming up this legislative session, which I'm very excited to talk about, that actually gets a procurement exemption for DNR. So we can use some of our trust fund dollars to pay for outcomes. We've got a wide range of ways that we're working on that. But I think the other thing about the Conservation Finance Act that I think is interesting too is it allows us to now have aggregators in the state. So that's a private industry that can get multiple farmers together or tree farms together and actually generate credits to sell into the voluntary markets. Because to Kevin's point, we don't have that compliance market here, but we do have voluntary market opportunities.
All right. Kevin, you had mentioned solar, so that's a nice segue into the next question on energy. How are you all proposing to work together on critical renewable energy and energy conservation issues and opportunities such as solar, bioenergy, wind, and at the same time to preserve critical ag and resource-based industries in the state?
That's for you.
Why y'all looking at me? So two things are true. We have to move to renewable energy. That is true. The other thing that's true is we have to grow food here. And right now there is a target of, a low number I've seen is 12,000 acres, high number I've seen is 40 or 50,000 acres of open space / farmland that's needed for commercial utility scale solar. The problem with commercial utility scale solar is it only works if it's dense. So you need a density of solar in order to make it affordable to generate that much energy. And if it's dense, it means that there's not a lot of sunlight getting to the soil, and there's also not a lot of room for equipment to go down rows. In every, and I've yet to see an exception, in every instance of a utility scale solar project that I've seen, step one is clear the topsoil. Well, game over. Now we keep being told, oh, but you can graze sheep, oh, but you can, plant wildflowers and do pollinators. That's great. We don't have an incredibly vibrant sheep industry in the state, but if that's the answer, if Maryland, due to its energy generation goals, needs to become the nation's land leader, well, that falls under our department to get it done. But I keep being the ones in the meetings to raise the flag, not anti-solar, super pro-solar. However, I'm super pro growing food. And so I need someone, research, technology, company, to tell me how we're going to do both. And it may be a more complex issue where you're going to offset the solar fields with vertical indoor farming, and that's how you're going to grow. Used to be vegetables, now we're growing vegetables in the inner city. Some benefits to that. We could talk about it. But my fear is that there will be this rush, and the ways the rules are set up, a county can't say, it's too much solar. We don't want any more solar. The PSC can override that. That there are not the limits or restrictions. So we're just asking that the folks who are making the solar policy are thoughtful about where it's going to go. Does it have to be on class 1 or 2 soils? Can it be on the lesser soils? Can it be other places? Can we cover Route 50? Can we, what are the things that we can do that will help prevent that direct conflict of food versus energy? Because we need both. I mean, that's a reality of the situation.
Okay, I'll say that we are transitioning. There's a green transition that's going on right now, and we have to think about all the renewable ways of generating electricity. Solar is just one of them. Wind, there's just so many ways to really focus on renewable energy. We have the Climate Solutions Now Act, and we have very aggressive goals. The most important one is reaching our 60% greenhouse gas reduction by 20 31, and that is not going to be easy to do. So we have to focus on this green transition. At the same time, I heard you, we have to do it in a way that we're not leaving farmers behind. So it's not about just taking over their land and converting that land solely, for the use of solar. It's about how do we do this together, which is your question. How do we work together, understanding all of the different sectors and make sure that we do it, we meet the goals that we have to meet, but in a way that we're protecting farmers and we're protecting businesses and we're looking at it from a way that it's a win-win for all. That's the challenge.
And I would add one thing in the natural resource space. We have the 60%, and then we have the net zero goal. And net zero is important because it factors in a space for sequestration. And so we've got the 5 million trees program that all of our agencies are working on together that increase that ability to pull the carbon out of the air, right? We're doing wetlands restoration. We're doing a wide range of restoration projects across the state that improve that, right? And as has been touched on before, soil health, critically important too. So I think we're thinking about this as the portfolio of options and staying really tight on what those can be. And I think to the Secretary's point, innovation is also going to be key, and partnership. And each one of our agencies, I believe, has really good relationships in different communities, right? And so by being able to bring those together, we can end up with a balanced approach.
Josh, thank you. Next question deals with budgets. And Tom, I'm going to go back to you. Earlier today, if I recall, you had said that you had actually implemented a number of conservation techniques on your property, but you really didn't get any kind of external compensation for that. You've done it out of your own resources. So the question here is, for each of the secretaries, are you planning to include money in your respective budgets to help operators and landowners, especially small and limited resource producers, achieve and maintain compliance and adopt and implement more environmentally friendly practices? Serena?
I'll start. Yeah, it's always important for us to make sure that we're funding this transition. And it shouldn't be on the local businesses to front all the money. That's just not how transitions work. It's a cost share. We have to give, and industry gives as well as consumers as well. So in our budget, I can't speak about the new budget and what's going to be in that budget, but we do put money aside for cover crops now. We support that. We fund that activity for farmers. And so we're going to continue to look at ways to make sure it's a cost share. Because again, that's how you do it. You have to have the government, and that's federal government, that's state government. We have to fund and help the transition. And we plan to do that in Maryland. And I definitely plan to do that at MDE as long as I get the money in my budget. But yes, that's a priority.
One of the great things about working at the department is that we've got a lot of special fund revenue, so it's a user pay, user benefit. So the highlight of my year is like when I get to feel like Oprah, and it's like, you get money and you get money. And we do it through a wide range of grant programs, and those go to a bunch of different things. And I think a really important way that we're thinking about this differently is how we're getting that money out to people. How are we doing this differently so small groups, small farms can have access to that funding? So we've got the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays Trust Fund of 2010, which is a mouthful, but that funds a wide range of things from tree plantings to stormwater resilience projects, cover crops, manure transport, you name it. And so that is one way. Every year we get that money in the door, and then it goes out through our grant gateways to members of the community and community groups. We're going to continue those programs, and then we also have the program Open Space Fund at the department, so looking at our land acquisition, protection, restoration as well. Again, special fund, so we have that fee comes in and then it goes back out the door.
And thank you for the question. I'm happy to say that the top funded programs in our department are to give away money to farmers. So through nutrient management, for example, and that's an example of what you were talking about, Secretary Mcllwain, where yes, we need to track nutrients to make sure that everyone who's farming is conscious of what they're putting on the land, and also so that we can track it for the Bay model. So we require a nutrient management plan, but we provide money through a new agreement with the University of Maryland for University Extension to write those nutrient management plans for farmers. So that's one example. Our ag cost share programs are the other example, where every 2 weeks at the Board of Public Works, we go down there and we're getting approval to give lots of money to farmers to install best practices. And so we love those programs. Let's shake the money tree and get some more money for it. Maybe I'll ask Secretary Kurtz for some money when you're giving it out next time. More of it?
Any questions on that? That ought to spark, oh, Tom.
So I'd really like to go back to the prior question, but first a comment, Kevin, with regard to blue catfish. The current dietary guidelines are for 4 ounces of fish a week.
We need to up that to like 2 million.
Heart health, obesity, diabetes, and certainly no nuggets.
So I shouldn't be frying my catfish every time I...
Depends on whether it's local oil, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, and local flour we should be having. I'm really glad to hear about the collaboration. We obviously need the health secretary here to help us with dietary guidelines. But you all have mentioned all of the challenges: access to healthy food, loss of biodiversity, eutrophication, carbon pollution. Somewhere in here I heard chemical pollution, all the challenges that we have. And you have all given us the answers already here. So one of the challenges we have with solar is that if you put it all together, that's a problem, as you mentioned. But if we distribute it, we need a way to get that power into the grid. You can have edible wildlife corridors to connect those together. And so what I mean by that is you have some sort of trees that provide fruits, nuts, and vegetables along a corridor, perhaps along a riparian buffer, to be able to and put your power lines underneath of it. You can even graze it. So let me get some comments about whether that's feasible, whether y'all would like to work on it.
Would love to work on it. I think everything is feasible. Where I get stuck is, and look, it's really complicated. Like, we're pro property rights. So if you come to me as a 5,000 acre farmer and say, but I want to put it all in solar, you got me, right? Go put it in solar. But there has to be a way to incentivize solar so that it is not prohibitively expensive to raise the solar high enough to graze other animals, or raise the solar and spread it out a few more feet so that it's not cost prohibitive, because that's the problem, is you need the density to make the math work for utility scale solar. For community solar, some amazing options, and I've seen some great presentations, and my team is having a meeting on that right now back at the agency from someone else who's got a great plan. But for utility scale solar, is it through tax breaks on solar in built environments that then makes it more affordable to spread it out a little bit on agricultural land? It's not a one agency solution. It's a legislative solution. It's a tax solution. But we're going to meet the goal. We have to meet the goal. We want to meet the goal, but we can't do it in a way that is wiping out food where we need that food grown the most.
I'll also add too, that also creates a habitat corridor for us too, right, Tom, to that point. And I think, when we evaluate how we do that, it actually starts with partnering with the utilities. So a lot of the reason we don't see that now is because they've got liability issues. If that gets too high, it could cause a fire hazard. There's a wide range of things. But what we are seeing is more utilities figuring out how to do that with us in partnership, and I think we've been kind of starting, it's like a little bit of an entry point, has been more the pollinator habitat, right? Higher warm season grasses, things along those lines. But what we see is that then builds into short shrubs, right? And then short shrubs build into silvopasture, to your point about the fruit trees and the nut trees. And thinking about how we're interconnecting, our green spaces with our highly developed spaces is kind of like a wild paradigm shift, right? But what we know is that we've seen, and the Harry Hughes Center, their analysis has shown this, we've seen a great deal of fragmentation of our natural habitats. And so what we need to rethink is, how do human corridors become wildlife corridors? Because originally, human corridors were actually just wildlife. Like, original people moved in wildlife corridors, and we've flip-flopped that. So there's a real opportunity there for us to be creative.
Any other questions? All right. This is on equity and justice. So how are principles of equity and justice incorporated into each of your agencies' policies?
I'll start with that one because that's one of my number one priorities, equity and environmental justice. Wherever I go, wherever I'm speaking, on panels, keynotes, whatever, that is the main thing I'm talking about. So I'll just simply say this. Everything that we do in our agency will be based on equity. We are looking at everything from an equity lens, and that's from permits to protecting the Chesapeake Bay, to helping farmers, helping whoever. Every single thing that we do in our agency, we will ensure that the voices of the unheard are heard, period.
We are following the lead of the secretary at DNR and of the governor, because it's critically important. And I think what we're really looking at is, where have we had process and programmatic failure in communities for a long period of time? Because we can change that, and we can change that rather quickly. And one of the places that we've seen that the most actually is in that grant program that I talked about. We have significantly changed the way that we do grants. You know, what we were finding is small number of organizations who had professional grant writers on staff were the ones that got our grants. So we were not putting that money into communities unless that organization was working there. So we've changed the way we do Grants Gateway now, whereas before you came and you wrote a single source grant for a thing, right? I want to plant trees in this neighborhood, and I'm going to do this really complicated process, and we're going to go back and forth for months. No. Now what we're doing is we're having people come to us with project ideas and then funding them through multiple pots to make sure that we get better outcomes and that it's much more accessible to people. So that's one way we're doing that in the funding space. But the other, and to the secretary's point, is actually understanding where these impacts are happening and then going out and proactively putting solutions in that space, whether it be stormwater and flood protection. We're thinking about what the additional benefit is in anything that we do.
I just want to add to that before you, because you mentioned funding, and that's so important. We give a lot of money out for grants and loans, and we have loan forgiveness programs, and the federal government requires that we give 40% of federal funds to the low-income areas. We do better than that. We're making sure that we don't have, to me, that's a small quota. We're looking at those environments and communities who need it the most. And so we are prioritizing even higher than Justice 40, meaning the 40%. So yes, our funding is definitely going to those communities, and we're putting high priority on that as well. Thank you for bringing that up.
So thank you both for the thoughtful policies and kind of how you're leaning into it. I'll say some things that are on our mind at the Department of Agriculture. First and foremost, most farmers in the state are old white men. We have to grow the diversity. Second, most farms in the state are multi-generational, meaning that someone bought it and someone else gets it, and they get it, and then their kids get it. In a place like Maryland, where development pressure is so incredibly intense, someone who's coming in who wants to farm likely can't afford to buy the size property that they need to actually have a go at it. And so we have to be creative in a place like Maryland for how we're going to get folks who want to farm onto farms, because in a lot of cases, the folks who want to farm in the future that are raising their hand saying, I want to farm, they're not old white men. So the reality is we want to get them land access. So how do we do that? I'll point to the partnership. DNR has been phenomenal as the primary landholder in the state. There's a lot of land that you're either managing or mowing or doing something to, where for a very low long-term lease, and you're trialing it and it's working, someone can farm for the first time and do it in a way that is sustainable. And they don't have, and they can build equity through and investment in their process and their program and their growing and their procedures and their markets and everything else, and then go buy the land. Because it's a cycle. Not everybody can, not everybody has access to the money. Not everybody can qualify for access to the money. And unfortunately, we've just created a disparate system. The other things that are on our mind are agricultural practices and where they might impact the local community. So we're cognizant of that, and we're talking through that internally to figure out how can we institute policies, regulations to lessen the impact on those communities of agricultural production. And then finally, I'll say urban farming is such an incredibly cool innovation. When you think about how cities and then inner cities are in such a poor state right now, where they don't have access to fresh local food, you have to have a car because the buses don't go where the food is, so you have to have a car, and if you don't have a car, then you have to hope that a local nonprofit starts a farmer's market. But if not enough people buy from the farmers, they don't come. It's extremely complicated. So enter an urban farmer who says, you know what? That's an open parcel. I'm going to grow something on that parcel right there, quarter size of this room, and I'm going to get the community involved. And I mean, I have been on a number of urban farms and talked to folks who have engaged, those who are organizing it, but those who are just neighbors who are curious about what's going on. And next thing you know, they're a radish farmer helping this local co-op. And they're learning about crops that they didn't know about. Their grandkids are learning about crops that they didn't know about because they haven't had access to it. And so the idea of growing food right where it's needed, yes, for scale, we're going to need to be out on the 100,000 acres in rural areas. But like, what an incredible innovation, and indoor farming, controlled environment farming, where you can grow millions of pounds of food right where it's needed.
So we're going to have to end it right there, but we want to thank you all for taking time out of your schedule to be here. This is a really unique opportunity to have all three of the secretaries here, to be able to listen to their thoughts and their philosophy. I'm sure that there's a lot of questions that you all might have as well, but this gave us an opportunity to kind of listen to what they're thinking about in terms of the vision, and we really appreciate not only your optimism, but also the expertise that you bring, and we know that your respective agencies are in a great, great place with your leadership. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. So I'm going to just make a few comments. You all don't have to be here. So I've been asked to wrap things up. Today, we've actually gone through a number of topics, which are really interesting, right? When you think about it. PFAS, we've talked about PFAS. We've talked about HPAI. We've talked about agritourism and taxation. We've talked about urban agriculture. The really unique aspect of that is the diversity of topics that we've actually discussed. We can't thank ALEI and the entire group that's associated with that program for the work that they do in terms of bringing this conference together. You know, when I think about agriculture, and I can use this platform to share a little bit of philosophy, but when we think about agriculture, there's so many individuals out there in society that demonize agriculture. They point fingers at agriculture. They identify things that might be going wrong with agriculture. But I think, as Neeth indicated earlier today, that the people that producers, whether they're in the rural community, they're in their urban community, they want to do the right thing. They oftentimes take their lead from recommendations that come from universities like the University of Maryland at College Park, University of Maryland Eastern Shore, a lot of the land-grant universities. And over the years, our recommendations have changed as we've gotten to know and understand better the environment that we work in, and sometimes the consequences of the recommendations that we've made as well. And so the producers have fully engaged in those recommendations over the years, and they're trying to do the same thing now as we find that, there are environmental issues, climate change. 30 years ago, we really weren't talking about climate change, certainly not to the level that we're talking about it now. We talked about soil health, but not in the way that we're talking about it with regards to carbon sequestration. The whole issue about the Chesapeake Bay, that's only happened in the last several decades. It certainly didn't happen in my father's lifetime, but it certainly is happening front and center right now as well. And to be able to make adjustments on the land, it's very, very difficult for these individuals to do. And by the way, we have to remember that none of these individuals are doing it because they have to. They don't have to farm. They can walk off of the farm. In fact, over 80% of farmers around the United States have off-farm jobs in order to be able to support what they do. These are people that do it because, number one, they love what they do. Number two, they feel as if they are contributing to the benefit of society overall. And it's an excellent lifestyle. But society oftentimes puts so many roadblocks in front of these individuals and then points fingers at them. And if we would begin thinking about agriculture in general as a resource that could go away, almost like a non-renewable resource, and it really takes a team effort, not just the onus on the shoulders of producers and farmers, but a team effort to help these folks do what they do in a way that allows them to continue to do this in generations beyond where they currently are right now, make it economically viable for them as well, to assure that we actually have farming and food production in the future, I think is fundamentally important. Since 2015 in the United States, we've lost over 12 million acres of farmland, 12 million acres, almost 13 million acres. That's the equivalent of the acreage in Maryland and New Jersey. We've also lost we've lost 200,000 farms since 2007. 200,000 farms. So those are farms that are gone. That's acreage is gone, and yet we know that the world population is going to increase from where we are right now, 7 billion, 7.5 billion, to well over 10 billion people within the next really 27 growing seasons. We don't have a lot of time when you think about it, right? So we've got greater needs in terms of food. We've got greater needs in terms of allaying food insecurity. 20% of the U.S. population is food insecure, right? And there are other pockets, certainly in the United States, that even have greater amounts of food insecurity as well. So all these kinds of pressures that farmers are facing, we've got to help them. We've got to help them through these regulations that we talked about today. We've got to help them in terms of financial support. We've got to help them, otherwise it's gone. We're not producing the food that we need. We're going to have empty shelves in grocery stores. And the amount of money that we're going to be spending on food right now, it's less than 7% on average of our total income. I just came from Ethiopia, arrived just a few days ago from there, where 80% of their income is used in order to be able to purchase food. We are blessed in terms of having access to safe, secure, and affordable food. We want to continue to be able to do that, not only for the people here in the United States, but beyond as well. And it takes conversations like this in order to continuously, I think, reassure us and validate that we need to continue to support our farming community. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for the ALAI group for putting all of this together. And thank you all for the discussions that you've had throughout the entire day. Appreciate that.